Today's episode of the franchise. May 30th, the Miami Heat are going to the NBA Finals. They outlasted the Boston Celtics. After being up 3-0, winning in Game 7, they will now be playing the Denver Nuggets in the NBA Finals. What are the Celtics going to do moving forward? What are they going to do this offseason with some pretty big decisions ahead of them? The Warriors general manager has stepped down. What does that mean for the Warriors? What do they got to do this offseason? They actually have a pretty important offseason ahead of them. And then Jimmy Garoppolo. There's some things to talk about there with him and what's going on with him. Let me adjust this camera real quick. Okay, there we go. Before we get into the episode, though, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music. That's where you can watch or listen to the podcast. You can also find the Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram in the description of every episode. So the Heat are going to the finals after being up 3-0 in the Eastern Conference Finals to the Boston Celtics and then losing 3 straight games. Boston forces a Game 7, obviously on that 0.1 second buzzer beater by Derek White in Game 6. Game 7 in Boston, I said yesterday I thought Boston was going to win this game and they were going to be the first team to go come back from a 0-3 deficit. I thought Boston had all the momentum on their side at home in the Garden. Game 7, 2 seed versus a seed. I thought Boston had every single thing going for them, at least leading up to the game, to go out there and win and go to the NBA Finals. However, that is not what happened. Miami wins 103-84, almost a 20-point victory for the Heat. Jimmy Butler was finally amazing. I mean, the first 3 games of this series, he was incredible. And then the last 3, he has just not been a productive player. He's been very inefficient on his shot making. I don't think he made near double-digit attempts. He hadn't made 10, 12 shots in a game yet from the field in those last 3 games. But in this Game 7, 28 points, 12 for 28 shooting, 7 rebounds, and 6 assists for Jimmy Butler. I think the bigger story of this game isn't Jimmy Butler. It's going to be Caleb Martin, who had 26 points, 4 for 6 from three-point range, and 10 rebounds in this game. He was absolutely amazing. He was arguably the most important piece to them winning this game. Bam, 12 and 10 in this game. Miami shot 50% from three-point range in Game 7. For Boston, it was another one of those performances where their stars just do not show up. And the recipe for success for the Boston Celtics is Tatum and Brown need to be playing at an elite level. And when one of them or both of them are not, they're not going to win any single game. Jaylen Brown had 19 points, 8 for 23 shooting. That was a horrible performance for him. Derek White with 18 points, 5 for 12 shooting. Tatum only had 14 points. He shot 5 for 13. He did hurt his ankle early on in the first quarter. Never really was super aggressive after that offensively. It was really up to Jaylen Brown. I mean, once Jason Tatum goes out with that injury, he really hurts himself right in that first quarter. It's all on Jaylen Brown. It is his time to show what he can do as the number 1 guy on this team in a Game 7, a winner-go-home scenario for this team, and he just did not show up at all in this game. So Jaylen Brown was disappointing. Tatum was disappointing as well. I know he got hurt, but he was still not impactful at all. Boston only shot 21% from 3 in this game. I want to talk about the Celtics first before we look at the finals preview. The Celtics have a lot of things a lot of interesting things going for them this offseason. A lot of possibilities are ahead for this team. One of them is a potential coaching change. Do they fire Joe Mazzulla, who, remember, he replaced Ime Udoka. He was the Ime Udoka head coach last season, takes them to the finals to 6 games against the Warriors. Then he gets fired for some in-the-team stuff. Now he's the head coach of the Houston Rockets. They replaced Ime Udoka with Joe Mazzulla. And the Celtics were great during the regular season. They were, honestly, if not at some points, better than they were last season this year. But when you get to the playoffs and you get to the Philly series and then this series against Miami, first of all, the Philly series was complete up and down performance for this team. And the same thing in this Miami series. First 3 games, this Celtics team looked like they had no business being in the Eastern Conference Finals. And the games 4, 5, and 6, they were probably the best team in the NBA. And then you get to this game 7, and they fall back to earth, and they are one of the worst teams on the floor. And you really could point to Joe Mazzulla for that. Look, this team last season with Ime Udoka was one of the best defensive teams in the NBA. They return pretty much the same roster. They add a few pieces who are actually some pretty good defenders, and their defense gets significantly worse this season. So there's definitely the possibility that they move on from Joe Mazzulla, or at least someone in that coaching staff, because you could see that there wasn't many adjustments made. There was weird lineup decisions. There was weird plays set up. You could just tell that Joe Mazzulla might not be the guy compared to what Ime Udoka was last season for this team. I think the biggest thing surrounding this Celtics team going into the offseason is going to be Jaylen Brown. What is going to happen to Jaylen Brown? What are the Celtics going to do with him? First of all, he's eligible for a Supermax extension. He made the All-NBA team this season, which allows him to be eligible for a 5-year, $290 million extension, which is going to pay him about $50, $60 million a season over those 5 years. And if you're Boston, do you really want to pay that? Jaylen Brown is a fantastic player. I mean, in the regular season, he's amazing. But in the postseason, you could argue that he disappears, right? He has not had many great playoff performances, at least in this playoff run, right? He has not been super consistent in this postseason run. So you could argue that is a reason why you don't want to pay him this money. But he is one of the best two-way players in the game. He's tremendous defensively at times, and he's a very versatile, dynamic offensive player. And that's a guy that you don't just get rid of. You don't just let him go, right? Boston's not just going to let him walk. They're either going to extend him or they're going to trade him. And the idea of a Jaylen Brown trade has been talked about for a while now. When Anthony Davis was originally on the block on the Pelicans, when he requested that trade, the Celtics were a rumored team, and Jaylen Brown was a potential piece. Same thing for a Kawhi Leonard trade when he got traded from the Spurs to the Raptors. And then, the Kevin Durant sweepstakes over the offseason when KD requested a trade in July. Jaylen Brown and the Celtics, Jaylen Brown was the centerpiece of a potential Celtics-Nets Kevin Durant trade. And you could even argue that Jaylen Brown, maybe he doesn't even want to be on the Celtics any further, right? There's been a lot of talk about the Celtics shopping him and this and that. And maybe Jaylen Brown doesn't want to be on the team going forward. So the Celtics have a lot of interesting things surrounding Jaylen Brown and what they want to do with him. If they trade him, I think there's a good amount of teams. I mean, there's a lot of teams that I think would want him. I think there's a few teams that really have some enticing trade packages. I think the one that people are going to talk about the most is Portland. They have the 3rd overall pick, and they've already basically come out and said that they would like to trade that pick and build a contender, get someone to help Damian Lillard get back to the postseason. Now, is that the right thing for the Portland Trailblazers to do? I don't think so. I think if you're Portland, you probably should trade Dame. I know he's loyal to the city, loyal to the franchise, but you should probably trade Dame because you have the 3rd overall pick, and you have a chance to build and restart. Or if anything, keep the 3rd pick and add, Brandon Miller, Scoot Henderson to Dame. But anyways, this is about Jaylen Brown and the Celtics, not the Blazers. But if you're Boston, this would be an enticing package. The 3rd overall pick, Anthony Simons. You could throw in some other pieces there, Shaedon Sharpe, maybe even a Yusuf Nurkic, maybe another pick for Jaylen Brown. For Boston, that's interesting, right? You have the potential to add Scoot Henderson, Brandon Miller at the 3rd overall pick. Maybe you could even trade that pick for another star-level player. You could trade the 3rd pick, maybe Toronto. You trade that 3rd pick to Toronto. Somehow you get Pascal in there. I don't know how the money would really work. But just because, let's say they made this trade. Brown is a member of the Blazers. You get the 3rd pick, Anthony Simons, and some other stuff. I don't know if it makes sense for Boston to necessarily draft someone at the 3rd overall pick when it might take them a few years to really get accustomed to this team and where they want to be with Jason Tatum. Atlanta's definitely a possibility. Maybe they want to move off of Trae Young or DeJounte Murray Houston is also a potential option. So, look, I think the Celtics are going to make some big moves to this roster. They have year in and year out, been eliminated in the postseason. They have not yet reached their goal of winning a championship. They made the finals last year, took the Warriors to 6 games. But I think the Celtics team needs to make a big change, and I think it should be more on the roster side than the coaching staff, right? You could make the case that you should fire Missoula and get someone else in there, maybe someone internally. But who is going to really improve this team? What coach out there is going to take this team to a championship level team and actually get them over the hump and win a title? And then I do think they will make a big move on the roster front, whether it's Jaylen Brown, whether it's Marcus Smart. They are going to make a big move this offseason and really shake up this roster and build it better around Jason Tatum. But let's get to this finals matchup: Nuggets versus Heat. If the Heat swept the Boston Celtics or 1-5, I think my prediction for this series would be a lot different than it is currently right now. But since the Heat did lose 3 consecutive games, they made it to a Game 7. I know they won the Game 7 in a near 20-point fashion, but I think Denver's going to win in 5. Like at worst, Denver is winning in 5. I don't think Miami can match up against this Denver team. Look, Nikola Jokic is probably the best basketball player on the planet at this current moment, in terms of scoring, passing, rebounding, playmaking. He is like an all-around tremendous player. Jamal Murray, I think people are starting to forget like how good this Nuggets team was. Like, yeah, they swept the Lakers, and the Lakers were actually playing really good basketball before the Western Conference Finals. The Nuggets beat the Suns, they beat the Timberwolves. They have been tremendous all season long. They have one of the best coaches in the league, arguably the best player, one of the best second options, and then they have great depth. Michael Porter Jr., KCP, Bruce Brown. They have so many options on this Denver team. I think we kind of are forgetting how good this team is. Look, for Miami, it's going to be difficult. They really will not be able to play their zone defense against the Denver Nuggets, right? Because Jokic is going to be able to expose that. He's going to be able to find people in open passing lanes, cutting on the outside, on the perimeter. Denver has too much going on in their system for Miami, in my opinion, to keep up. Now, I think Jimmy Butler is going to have some great games, even in some losses. I think Bam is going to be a really important piece, right? Obviously, the guys of Caleb Martin, Max Strus, Gabe Vincent, Duncan Robinson, those guys are all very important to the Heat's success. But I think Bam is easily the second most important player for the Heat in this series. He needs to really step it up on the offensive end. Denver is a minus 480 favorite according to FanDuel to win the title. I have them winning in 5 games. I think if I was to pick, I think Denver wins the first 2 at home, Miami wins Game 3, and then Denver wins Games 4 and Game 5. So that's my finals prediction. I think Denver will win the title in 5 games over the Miami Heat. All right, Warriors GM Bob Myers steps down from the team. He said it's, quote, "it's just time." This is an interesting one, right? Apparently they didn't have any contract negotiation talks for like the whole season. And now he's gone. Now he's resigning, stepping down. First of all, I mean, I don't know if he's going to want to continue to be an executive. I'd imagine he is. He's one of the best GMs in the league, arguably the best. What the heck is going on? He is going, if he wants to continue to be an executive, he is going to be the hottest name on the market. I mean, every single team besides like the Celtics, the Jazz because they have Danny Ainge, the Spurs. There's only like 3 or 4 real teams that are not going to go and try and bring this guy in. But I think every other team in the league is going to be offering and calling to get this guy on their team because he built this Warriors dynasty, right? He brought over Kevin Durant. I don't know if he was actually there for the Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green draftings, but he has been a part of this dynasty team basically from the start. And now he's gone and he's available. The main point I want to talk about this is the Warriors offseason. They have a lot of interesting things to go over this offseason in pertaining to their future. First of all, Klay Thompson has 1 year left, and then he's a free agent in 2024. Draymond Green has a $27 million player option this offseason. Will he decline it? Will he accept it? I guess we'll see. Wiggins has 3 years left and a player option, roughly $27 million a year. And then Jordan Poole signed that 4 year, $128 million deal last offseason. Steph Curry is obviously under contract long term, and Poole's really the only other long term deal on this team. The Warriors have a lot of decisions to make. I think you can really point that they're going to move off of some of these guys. I think the number one guy that you can kind of pencil in that they should be trying to shop this offseason and move him off of this team is Jordan Poole. The way he played in the postseason, basically he's not playable in big time minutes in the postseason because of his atrocious defense and his ability to just keep fouling. And then he didn't even show up offensively in this postseason run for the Warriors last year, this past season. So Jordan Poole is most likely the number one guy to get off of this team, right? His contract is huge. The Warriors are deep into their cap, and they definitely should be looking to move him off of the team. And then it comes down to Andrew Wiggins, who's actually a very nice piece for the Warriors. He fits very nice with this team. And then it's Klay Thompson and Draymond Green. If Draymond Green opts out, there is definitely a possibility that he does not return to this team, to this Warriors team. Although he's been there his whole career, has 4 championships, there's definitely the possibility that he doesn't return there because he could want a big time deal. And when you look at what Jaylen Green does for your team, for the Warriors, he's the most impactful player. But if he was on any other team, he might not be as impactful of a player. So if Draymond Green wants a big time deal, he could definitely find himself on a new team next season. And the same thing goes for Klay. I do think Klay would be the guy that stays the longest because he is basically the second best player on this team over the last 8 seasons, except for when they had Kevin Durant. Klay is arguably the most important player outside of Stephen Curry to this Warriors team. But it's going to be very, interesting to see what the Warriors do, right? They have a lot of money. They're deep into the cap, deep into the luxury tax. They have to move some of this money. I think Jordan Poole is the number one. Potentially Wiggins, you could see him getting dumped. And then it is, if Draymond opts out and he wants a big time deal, maybe the Warriors ultimately have to let him walk. All right, finally, Jimmy Garoppolo. This is a very interesting thing going on with the Raiders, with Jimmy G. It's very interesting. We are like just learning about this right now. So Jimmy G suffered a foot injury 2022 season. Trey Lance was the starter, injured himself week 2. Jimmy Garoppolo has to take over seemingly for the rest of the season. He hurts his foot, and then that's when you had the Brock Purdy takeover last season. So Jimmy Garoppolo injures his foot last season, gets surgery in the offseason after signing with the Raiders. There is literally a clause in Jimmy Garoppolo's contract called Addendum G. Jimmy G signed this waiver, basically saying that he doesn't have to pass the team's physical as of now. He's signed onto the deal, but he doesn't have to pass the physical. However, he basically cannot earn a penny of his money until he passes a physical with the Raiders. And his foot is still injured, has to go under more surgery, more recovery. There's a possibility, one, that Jimmy Garoppolo is not playing for the Raiders next season because of this foot injury. And with that, the Raiders can literally cut him and not have to pay him a single dime because of this waiver that he signed, where basically he cannot file any grievance against the Raiders, against the NFL, against anyone responsible for his injury. If he hurts his foot more by continuing to play, he acknowledged that. He signed off to that. And they converted his $11 million signing bonus to salary. So his $22.5 million salary, he won't get any of it until he passes a physical with the team. However, if his foot is still injured, isn't fully recovered, he won't be able to pass a physical. And the Raiders can just cut him. easily, not have to pay him any money, not have any dead cap, and Jimmy Garoppolo basically doesn't get any of the money that he signed for this offseason. And for the Raiders, it's weird. There was Aaron Rodgers was available. Lamar Jackson's kind of available. They had Derek Carr. There was also 4 quarterbacks in this draft that you could have went after. You go and get Jimmy Garoppolo. Outside of that, if let's say Jimmy G doesn't play this season, the Raiders are going to be horrible, right? They have a lot of skill, talent. Devontae Adams, Josh Jacobs. They brought in Austin Hooper and Michael Mayer in the draft. Hunter Renfrow, Jacoby Myers. But their quarterback room is Brian Hoyer and an Aiden O'Connell, who they just drafted in the NFL draft. Why the Raiders didn't go out there and draft or trade up and draft one of these young quarterbacks doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, especially when Jimmy Garoppolo, his foot injury seems to be something that he'll have for the rest of his career. And he might not even play this season a single snap for this team. I don't know. The Raiders are going to suck next season, so hopefully they're out there able to get Caleb Williams, number 1 overall in the 2024 NFL draft. But it's just very. This is a weird thing, right? Jimmy Garoppolo won't even there's a chance he doesn't even play and doesn't get any of his money because he signed this clause in his contract. And the Raiders are smart by doing this, right? It's just interesting that they sign a guy with tons of injury history, ACL, foot, shoulder, when you could have just went after, and he's not even like, when he is healthy and he's playing, he's not even one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. He's not going to carry your team. He's not going to take your team to a Super Bowl or to the postseason unless you have a elite roster around him, which the Niners did, and the Raiders definitely do not because their defense is horrible. Anyways, that's going to do it for this episode of the franchise. We'll be back very soon with another episode.